The First Crusade was conceived by Pope Urban II 1088 to 1099 CE, following an appeal from the Byzantine Emperor Alexios I Komnenos, who wanted to fight back against the expanding Muslim Seljuk Turks who had robbed the Byzantine Empire of a good portion of Asia Minor. The fact that Jerusalem, the holiest city in Christendom, had also fallen proved a great motivator for knights to travel from all over Europe and try to retake it. Initially, the mixed force of Crusaders and Byzantines enjoyed success, notably recapturing Nicaea in June 1097 CE, and winning a great victory at Doralion on the 1st of July 1097 CE. The Crusader Byzantine army then split up in September 1097 CE, with one army moving on to Edessa further to the east and another into Cilicia to the southeast. The main body headed for Antioch in Syria, the key to the Euphrates frontier, the famous fortress standing on their way to the Holy Land and held by the Seljuk Turks. The city garrison is strong and food supplies are large, but the commanders know that without taking Antioch, they will not reach Jerusalem. From the northwest, the city was protected by the Orontes River, and from the southeast by Mount Silpius. Although the fortress's bastions were behind it, it remained well protected by the wall and countless towers built by Emperor Justinian for 100 years ago. In addition, a citadel towered over the city, the last line of defense. The Turkish garrison numbered 5,000 people. Garrison commander Yegishion was aware of the approach of the Crusaders, so food supplies were created in the city. Yegishion also requested the support of the rulers of the nearest cities, Aleppo, Mosul and Damascus. When the time came, the 30,000 army of Crusaders crossed the river and headed from the east. They soon encountered an iron bridge that led to Antioch. However, as they approached, they encountered a fence secured high on the walls and rained down a hail of arrows on the Crusaders. Unable to somehow overcome these circumstances, without thinking twice, the Crusaders retreat to the siege camp. After a while, taking a breath, the Crusaders decided to build fortifications near the rivers that are adjacent to the walls of Antioch on the other side. The Crusaders were divided into several groups. Bohemond camped outside St. Paul's Gate, near the northernmost corner of the city walls. To the west were Hugh I, Count of Amandois, Robert Curthos, Duke of Normandy, Robert II, Count of Flanders, and Stephen II, Count of Blois. Adhemar of Lepuy and Raymond IV, Count of Toulouse, took up positions outside the Dog Gate. Godfrey of Bouillon was stationed west of the Duke's Gate in the northwest of the city walls. Yegishion was counting on an assault. However, when it became clear that an assault would not happen, he began to organize forays into the separated detachments of the Crusaders. Horse archers left the walls time after time to rain down a barrage of arrows on the Crusader camps, and when the Crusaders began the pursuit, they instantly rushed to Antioch, where, in turn, the archers of the garrison downed their pursuers with arrows. Soon winter came, and the supplies of the Crusaders began to dwindle quickly. The leaders of the Crusader army decided to create a supply route from the port of St. Semyon to the siege camps. Soon the Crusaders managed to take control of the port. The supplies that the Crusaders needed are the first to arrive from Cyprus. After, at the request of Bishop Odema, reinforcements from 12 Genoese ships arrived on November 1st. By Christmas, the Crusader army was on the verge of starvation. To solve this problem, Bohemond, together with Robert of Flanders, took half the soldiers and set off along the Orontes. Suddenly, 3 days' journey from Antioch, The vanguard, under the command of Robert, met a detachment of 10,000 people assembled by Duke of Damascus to lift the siege of Antioch. The battle has begun. Robert held his position firmly until Bohemond arrived and attacked the Turks. They together defeated the enemy, but noticeable losses forced them to return to the walls of Antioch. Meanwhile, Yagishion noticed the division of the Crusader army and unexpectedly attacked Raymond's soldiers. However, Raymond not only successfully repelled the attack, but only because of a small misfortune, he did not take the entire fortress. The siege continued. Winter worsened the Crusaders' plight as hunger eroded their morale, compelling them to slaughter most of their horses, symbols of the high status of medieval knights. Many abandoned the siege, and many succumbed to hunger. However, they continued to hold the lands around Antioch. The arrival of Byzantine food at St. Simeon in February significantly improved their situation. Soon, news came of another Turkish detachment from the city of Haram, rushing to aid the city. Soon Aymond is chosen as the leader of the Crusader army, tasked with defeating the garrison of the fortress of Harima, located west of Antioch, and posing a threat to the Crusader forces. He gathered all the remaining horses and formed a detachment of 700 heavily armed soldiers, who departed from the camp at night. Upon arrival, Aymond employs courtier tactics to compel the harem defenders to launch a sortie. By staging a sortie, the defenders sealed their fate. The heavily armed cavalry of the Crusaders swept through their ranks like an avalanche. Bohemond succeeds in neutralizing most of the garrison, but he refrains from attempting to storm the fortress itself. To avoid wasting time, and to break the morale of the remaining garrison, Bohemond decides to stage a public execution of prisoners right in front of the gates of the harem fortress. However, the garrison responded in kind and immediately began to kill the Greek Christians, Armenians, and Syrians living in the fortress. After that, the bodies and limbs of the dead were thrown from the walls and even launched from catapults. Soon, Bohemond returned to Antioch, resumed the siege alongside the other Crusader armies. Despite supplies arriving at the port of St. Simeon, the Crusaders continued to face starvation. Bohemond decides once more to leave the camp to replenish supplies, taking Robert II and a small army of 800 fighters with him. Bohemond decides to plunder Al-Bara, but soon an enemy army led by Totikin arrives from Damascus. Totikin immediately advanced toward the Crusaders' position, leaving Bohemond with no time to transport the looted goods. Bohemond quickly organized his knights for battle and led his units in a direct charge against the approaching enemy. Bohemond awaited the enemy's attempt to flank them and then advanced to meet them, hoping to crush their ranks. However, Totikin's army held firm and pushed the Crusaders back to their camp near Albara. After the battle, Totikin's soldiers started chasing down the infantrymen who hadn't made it back to the fortifications in time. However, upon nearing the camp, they refrained from attacking. The fierce attack by the Crusaders, while not defeating Totikin's army, made him reconsider his campaign toward Antioch. During Bohemond's absence, Yorgi commanded units of the garrison to conduct a sortie from the eastern gate, circling around the Orontes River to strike at the Crusaders' camps. However, the Crusaders managed to stop the swift attack of the enemy and push back. Despite the defenders' setbacks, they succeeded in killing the standard-bearer at Himar. Soon, the unity among the Crusaders started to dissolve rapidly during the siege. Eventually, the situation escalated to the point where the Byzantine army commander, Tatikios, personally chose to depart from the camp. He informed everyone that he was going to procure supplies and assured them that he would return with what he had pledged. A while after Tatikios left, the supplies indeed arrived, but the Byzantine commander was not among them. The situation grew dire when the Crusaders learned of a vast 12th enemy army advancing from the east to break the siege. Desperately, they gathered 700 knights for a mission under Bohemond. Hidden in the rocks, the knights awaited the Conians at the crossing, led by Faker Olmorg Radwan at the vanguard. When most of the column had crossed the Iron Bridge, Bohemond gave the order. 6 squadrons of heavily armed Crusader knights charged the unsuspecting soldiers of Faker Olmorg Radwan at full speed. After a period of fierce fighting, the entire column converged into the heart of the battle. Bohemond and his retinue, surrounded, also plunged into the thick of the fight. Bohemond launched a powerful attack on the Turkish troops, with the force so intense that the tips of the banners flew over the Turks' heads. Astonished, the Turks turned to flee. The Crusaders pursued them, killing many all the way to the Iron Bridge. Bohemond staked the entire fate of the Crusader campaign on this battle and emerged victorious. Meanwhile, the garrison of the city, having learned about Bohemond's departure, again organizes a sortie, but again unsuccessfully. Upon Bohemond's arrival at the camp, news of the victory at the Iron Bridge spread throughout the neighboring regions. A month later, artisans and heavy loads sent by allies arrived at the port. The route from the port to the camp was lengthy and passed by Antioch. Bohemond and Raymond set out to transport the cargo, and the governor of Antioch saw an opportunity. He decided to set an ambush. However, before confronting Bohemond's supply column, archer units launched attacks on the Crusaders' siege camps to prevent them from rushing to Bohemond and Raymond's aid during the ambush. On March 7th, a sizable contingent of defenders left the city and attacked the Crusader column. The Crusaders at the front of the column panicked and fled in all directions. Those who managed to escape the battle survived, while those who did not were killed mercilessly. Fortunately for the Crusaders, the front of the column consisted of simple infantry, while the knights, along with Bohemond and reinforcements, were in the rearguard. Gortfrid of Bouillon circled the battle, returned to his camp to gather his army, and advanced to assist Bohemond. A fierce battle erupted near the walls of Antioch, with the sound of thunderous combat echoing all the way to the Crusader camps. Fortunately for Bohemond, Gortfrid Bouillon arrived just in time, leading his army to break through the enemy's formation. The defenders were then compelled to retreat into the city across the bridge. The pressure was so intense that the fleeing soldiers trampled each other, resulting in many casualties on the bridge. The garrison suffered significant losses, with around 1,500 soldiers dead on both sides. Soon after this battle, the Crusaders began constructing another fort, called La Mahamri, on the site of an old mosque. Following its completion, the Crusaders, led by Raymond IV, settled within the fortifications. Yogi Sion was infuriated by the Crusaders' audacity and attempted to establish a camp. However, heavy rain exhausted his troops, giving the Crusaders enough time for reinforcements to arrive from other camps and repel the Turkish garrison's attack. In April, the Crusaders erected their final fortification near Antioch's St. George's Gate, centered around a monastery. The Crusaders finally succeeded in gripping Antioch tightly, but the defenders, weakened by previous losses in the garrison, were unable to effectively organize sorties or disrupt the construction of the fortifications. Now, all trade caravans bound for Antioch were diverted to the monastery, falling directly into the hands of the Crusaders. The city's defenders were now limited to supplies obtained from hard-to-reach mountain paths, and the garrison's forays ceased entirely. Meanwhile, the Crusaders bolstered their forces with supplies from caravans and shipments sent to the port by allies. Soon, they also received gifts from the ruler of Edessa, Baldwin of Boulogne. On May 28th, the Crusaders learned of a new threat from Baghdad. Yogi Sion had requested help from Seljuk leader Kerboga, who, with an army of 35,000 to 45,000 soldiers, had recently besieged Edessa without success. Kerboga's forces were expected to arrive at Antioch within a week. Wasting no time and aware of the impending encirclement, the Crusaders decided to storm the city. Bohemond secretly contacted an Armenian captain named Firuz, who commanded the southwestern part of the wall. Firuz agreed to let the Crusaders into the city. The exact reason for Firuz's betrayal of Yogi Sion is unclear, but Bohemond's promise of wealth and power likely persuaded Firuz to surrender his section of the wall. On June 2nd, 700 Crusaders, led by Robert of Bouillon and Bohemond, abandoned their fortifications to deceive the sentinels stationed at Antioch's citadel. By around 3 a.m., the Crusaders, concealed behind the slope, approached the walls where Firuz and his trusted men were already waiting for them. When the Crusaders reached the tower and began to whistle, Firuz promptly threw down a ladder for them. Bohemond and some of his men climbed the wall and entered the city. They killed the defenders at St. George's Gate, opened the gates, and the Crusaders surged into the city. Chaos soon erupted in Antioch as Bohemond's Crusaders slaughtered everyone in their path. The Crusaders spread terror throughout the city, causing the defenders' morale to plummet. Upon seeing the Crusaders on the streets, small groups of defenders immediately began to flee. By dawn, Bohemond's Crusaders were nearing the eastern walls, where the main Crusader forces were stationed. Almost the entire city had been overtaken, and the peasant population, who had hoped for mercy from the Franks, waited all night for their deliverance. However, the Crusaders showed no mercy. The city was filled with the blood of elderly men, women, and children, their bodies strewn across the streets. Within hours, the city was completely captured. Yagishion was killed, but his son managed to reach the citadel and continued the defense. The end of the siege was approaching. Soon after capturing the city, the Crusaders realized there were no supplies, and the local horses were unsuitable for fighting Kerboga's approaching army. However, a few days later, the first troops of Kerboga's army arrived at Orontes. Weeks earlier, they might have easily defeated the besiegers, but they had attempted to capture Edessa, which Baldwin controlled. Under the command of Godfrey's brother, Edessa held out, forcing the Turkish generals to abandon their plans to capture the city and advance to Antioch instead. Kerboga, unwilling to waste time, attempted to take the city by storm. The battle raged for 2 days, but the Crusaders held their ground. Despite repelling the assault, the situation in the city was dire. Provisions were nearly depleted, the enemy stood at the gates, and the defenders' morale continued to plummet. Upon learning that the citadel had not fallen, Kerboga began constructing fortifications near the iron gates and sent small reinforcements to the citadel. At the same time, the Crusaders sent units through the southern gates to attack Kerboga's fortifications, surprising the enemy. Initially gaining the upper hand, the Crusaders were eventually forced to leave the camp with their loot due to heavy losses. Kerboga dispatched troops to pursue the retreating Crusaders, managing to intercept and destroy a small portion of them. Kerboga realized he needed to prepare for a long siege, but his generals demanded an assault. Consequently, he sent a significant part of his army through the iron gates into the citadel. Kerboga then ordered the remaining defenders to open the citadel's gates that led directly into the city. The Crusaders anticipated the enemy's narrow column and were ready. Meanwhile, other Kerboga troops near the western walls began their assault. The Crusaders prepared to repel the Seljuk attack and engaged in a fierce battle when the time came. Fighting on two fronts for 2 days, the Crusaders repeatedly managed to push back the enemy waves. However, Kerboga continuously sent fresh reinforcements. The summer heat took its toll as many defenders, suffering from dehydration, lost their ability to fight. Soon, desertion began to occur. They fled to the southern walls, using ropes to climb up and down. However, Many were eventually captured by the Seljuks and killed. Having never faced such dire conditions before, the Crusaders found themselves in a living hell. Desperation grew among the Crusaders, but their leaders remained resolute. Bohemond and Raymond rallied their troops, urging them to stand firm and defend the city. The narrow streets of Antioch became the stage for a brutal hand-to-hand combat, with every corner fiercely contested. After 4 days of battle, Bohemond initiated a strategy of burning houses behind the fighting Crusaders, creating an illusion of an attack from surviving residents who had escaped death during the initial assault. This tactic led to a citywide fire in Antioch. Amidst the chaos, the Crusaders found hope in a celestial event. They witnessed a passing comet, which they interpreted as a divine gift. Inspired by this celestial sign, the Crusaders regrouped and defended their original positions, pushing back Seljuk units. Following heavy losses, Kerboga was compelled to order a retreat at dawn. He regrouped in new positions and initiated a lengthy siege, taking advantage of the hunger experienced by the Crusaders trapped within the walls of Antioch. During the long weeks of siege, the Crusaders conducted small forays in search of supplies. However, more often than not, they returned empty-handed or with casualties. Meanwhile, in the besieged city, one of Raymond's soldiers, Pierre Barthélemy, claimed to have had a vision of the Holy Lance hidden in Antioch. Raymond was initially skeptical, but decided to excavate under one of the churches. After finding nothing, Pierre jumped into the pit and began digging with his bare hands. He presumably found the tip of a spear, though it was likely just an ordinary one. Despite the leader's skepticism, they pretended to believe in the miracle, which significantly boosted the city's defenders' morale. The Crusaders started readying themselves for the decisive battle, facing the choice between perishing from hunger or meeting their fate with weapons in hand. On the morning of Monday, June 28th, after 3 days of fasting, the Crusader army departed from the city, carrying the Holy Lance on foot. As all the horses had either been consumed or perished, the army was gearing up for battle. Kerboga held off from attacking immediately, waiting for the Crusaders to be out in the open to prevent them from retreating back into the city. The Turkish soldiers guarding a nearby gate attacked the Crusaders, but failed to break their formation. The Crusader archers immediately unleashed a flurry of arrows on the Seljuks, taking up positions near the walls under cover. The vanguard of the Crusaders launched a frenzied attack on the enemy, quickly overwhelming them. Within minutes, the Seljuks retreated to the nearest fortification. Despite their superior numbers both in the fortifications and nearby, the enemy army was still concentrated. Bohemond gave the order, and the entire Crusader army surged towards the Seljuk fortifications. The Seljuks were unable to withstand the dense formation of the Crusaders, who advanced step by step, pushing them further back. Eventually, the Seljuks abandoned the idea of defending the fort and retreated to other fortifications. One question remains unclear to many. Why did the Seljuk leader wait and not come to the aid of his troops in the fortifications near the northern walls of Antioch? Many believe that Kerboga awaited Bohemond's last reserves to leave the city. However, those reserves remained, as Crusader forces in the citadel could still attempt to recapture the town if necessary. Eventually, under pressure from his military leaders, Kerboga gave the go-ahead for battle with the Crusaders, who were already approaching the second fortifications. However, the troops lacked clear organization. Seljuk forces dispersed in the surrounding area slowly approached the unfolding battle. They even attempted to strike from the rear and capture the gates, but Bohemond, anticipating this move, calmly repelled the attack. As a result, most of the Seljuk army positioned on the western side of Antioch's walls fled from the battle. Meanwhile, the battle for the second fortifications unfolded. Though reinforcements arrived from other positions, they were insufficient to push back the Crusaders and served only to slow their progress. The Seljuk cavalry units within the fortifications were pinned down and unable to fight outside the fort. Meanwhile, their infantry was significantly weaker compared to the Western warriors. Soon, the Crusaders captured the second camp. Only a few enemy forces escaped and joined Kerboga. Upon his arrival, Kerboga was preoccupied with rallying the fleeing units from the previously lost fortifications. He eventually managed to bring a small portion of the troops back under control and threw them into battle. However, the fortifications were now defended by the Crusaders. Despite the Seljuks' efforts to recapture the fort, they were unsuccessful. Kerboga witnessed the collapse and defeat of his large army against the Crusaders. He decided to retreat with all his troops. Seeing this, the defenders of the citadel surrendered. The victory at Antioch was a testament to miraculous leadership, cohesion, and dedication. Having survived numerous troubles and adversities, the army Crusaders achieved a triumph that once seemed unattainable. Now, the path to Jerusalem was finally open for them.